Akedah Project.
We invite you to join.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
I want to say a few things about reading ancient Jewish text as a writer and as an artist, rather than as an academic or a rabbi or anything else. That there's a great privilege in approaching our ancient cultural roots through the liberated and liberating prism of literature and art. When I come to study Torah, when I come to study Bible or Midrash or Talmud or whatever, Hasidic, Kabbalistic text, Hasidic text, I enjoy a certain freedom in celebrating the beauty of it, the intensity of it, the friction between the ancient and the modern, that someone who's coming in the name of a discipline or a dogma cannot do. If I approach the text as a rabbi, I would have been committed to a certain theological, ethical, religious, or you know, some framework, some ideological framework, often with a strong ethical anchor that pulls me down to the moral ground, especially because in Jewish, ancient Jewish texts in the Torah, the universe is a moral universe. So you almost have to fight against this gravity of ethics, of morality, in order to let the story fly. All of this on steroids is the Akedah. It's the most volatile of all tales. There's another thing that one should be a bracha, you know, Baruch shelo asani akademai. Like, thank God I'm not a researcher, because then you are stuck with the intellectual comparative prism. And that, I think it's important that somebody does it, but why me? You know, it's important that somebody does many painful tasks. I think that the beauty of our engagement with these ancient texts, the joy of it begins, the inspiration, the value for me today begins when I can detach myself from all the theological, academic, intellectual not so much, but academic for sure, strings that are attached to this, and allowing myself to enter this space of this text completely free and find whatever I find in there that catches my eye, that I would like then to come to you, my readers, and bring them and say, look at these amazing jewels I found, without any need to tell you immediately what to do, that means we have to do this, that means we have to think that. This story is, as I said, it's uber dramatic because it is a very, very problematic story. It is a very problematic story, not only for our own time, but it is a problematic story on every level. I mean, the Bible tells it in this kind of deadpan, a detailed way, which almost speaks of PTSD, okay? Post-traumatic disorder, which I believe that in some ways there is an element of post-traumatic disorder since the Akedah. But so there's this dry, deadpan, detailed, slow unraveling of this horrific tale without any emotional outlet whatsoever. The Bible is not afraid to describe emotion at all. The Bible is very good at describing emotion. Here, deadpan, as if there's no emotions. The Talmud then, and then the Midrashic literature, take this story and they open this black box of the story of the Akedah, and they try to look at the motivations, the emotions, and the positions that the different protagonists of the story are taking. So a whole plethora, a whole collection of midrashic work that tell us something about this story that once you hear it, it makes total sense. And the source of this understanding is in the Talmud. Tractate Sanhedrin, page 89b, in which the Talmud says, in so many words, the Akedah was Satan's idea. Satan, it is a diabolic idea planted in God's mind. Isn't it fascinating? It's amazing. Once you hear that, and that's the Talmud, that's not some radical, reform rabbi somewhere. It is the Talmud. For me, it reframes the entire story, because we all feel that there's something very wrong with the story of the Akedah. And because we feel that there's something very wrong about this Nisayon, this trial of Abraham, there was so much effort to glorify it and to explain it. Whenever you see a lot of work glorifying something, you should look for the problem under it. A lot of midrashic and storytelling means that there's a wound. It's all scar tissue. Bland text calls for very little midrashic work. There's a big hole. The hole is that everything we believe about God and our relationship with it, him, her, it, the divinity, is completely undone by the basic story of the Akedah. Because this is indeed a diabolic idea, to have a son, a father, do mock execution of the son. How does this even work with our sensibilities, or the Bible's even sensibility about the nature of the divine as all just, all good? Chesed, Rachamim, where is that? The first character we explore here is the character of God. We are the product of late monotheism, post Maimonides, post Rambam, where we think of God as this abstract being that has no personality, no persona, no attributes. This equation that the God of the Bible and the God of the Talmud is a very human persona with conflict, with regrets, with anger, with weaknesses towards his creatures. Okay? It is a much more relatable God than the abstract God of late monotheism. By telling us that the Akedah is really Satan's idea, and that we learn something about God. We learn something about the nature of the divine. That the divine is complex. The divine can have doubts. The divine has second thoughts. The divine is swayable, which if you then look at the Bible, it makes total sense. God regrets everything all the time in the Bible. Moses spends his entire career trying to calm down God's, do anger management to God. So clearly this is, but we forget all this when it comes to the Akedah. Now we have to talk about another character, Satan. Who is Satan? So God here appears as a weaker, less secure, and less all-knowing and omnipotent than we like to think of it. The Talmudic retelling is actually shrinking the role of God in this story. That's huge. Now Satan, who is Satan? We don't have that whole, scary persona, the horned lord of evil. This is not Jewish. Satan is one angel amongst the ministering angels. By the way, in another midrash, they don't even say Satan. They said that the whole ministering angels, Malachei Sharet, are very jealous of Abraham, and they're trying to say to God, look, you think he is righteous, but try really testing him. So the angels are jealous of Abraham, as they were, by the way, according to Midrashic and Talmudic storytelling, of Adam. The angels hated Adam. because they were the favorites before that. Do you see how the plot thickens? Really thickens. You feel it. It's wonderful. It's liquid gold. This is our job as commentators and Jewish storytellers, as we take something that is 2D or even 3D and we make it into a million D. Endless facets. 70 panim la. 70 faces, that's only what we see. So Satan here is basically God's Yetzer Hara, God's evil inclination, God's self-doubt, God's doubt of his own creation. We see the same role, by the way, in the book of Job, Iyov, where in Job 2, the plights of Iyov are the idea of Satan. This story basically sits on the blueprint of Iyov. So Satan then becomes a very active a participant in the story of the Akedah. So the Midrash takes us to these fantastic places where Abraham is walking with Isaac, and then Satan makes himself into a river, and into this and into that, all kinds of efforts to stop Abraham, because Satan put a wager with God. Satan has a stake in this story now. He wants Abraham to fail. Why? Maybe because he wants to be the chosen one. He wants to prove to God that putting all his, throwing his lot with humanity was wrong. All the ministering angels thought that from the beginning. Creating humanity was a very bad idea. And Satan goes and does his best to stop the Akedah. And it becomes very fantastic. It becomes magical realism, kind of. Now, I want to tell you a word about Midrash and Midrashic storytelling. These storytellings happened in a time where we had very few visual representations of the world, and we had very few representations of the world, period. Eloquence. We are all very eloquent because we're bombarded by words all the time. Eloquence was a very rare commodity. A good storytelling talent and eloquence were very rare. And you had very few other representations in the world. I'm talking about artistic stimulation to the mind. Literary, artistic, very few. If somebody told you a story like this about a father and a son, and Satan coming and turning himself into a river to stop the righteous from reaching their goal, and so on and so forth, this explodes the imagination of the reader, of the listeners. And Midrash is first and foremost an oral art. It's for storytellers and listeners. So when you read it, you really get, for me as a writer and as a Jewish writer today, as a Jewish storyteller, I am very proud to be a part of the lineage of storytelling that is so imaginative, so wild, and indeed so bold, because to say what the Bible tells you, it ain't necessarily so. This wasn't God's idea. It was Satan's idea. That's very radical. It's chutzpahdik, it's irreverent. One of the things that the rabbis who spoke the Midrash, somebody spoke it and others wrote down, is that they bring Sarah into the story. In the biblical version, usually the Bible is very pro-women. Women have very strong and positive roles in the Bible, very much so. Every woman mentioned in the Bible is amazing. And that's something that we don't say enough, and we should. And in the story of the Akedah, Sarah is kind of left out of the drama. The Midrashic stories bring her back and in some ways make Sarah a tragic heroine. Because the Midrash follows how Sarah feels and how she begs, she's suspicious of her husband. Actually, the Midrash Tanchuma tells us that Abraham had to wake up early in the morning, which is something that's in the Bible, in the Reshit, in Genesis. And many commentators says, why did he have to wake up so early? So according to Midrash Tanchuma, it's in order to escape before Sarah catches him, because she would never let him do that. And we know Sarah from Bereshit, she was not a pushover. She's a tough mama. And at the age of 90, when she finally has her son, she's not gonna let her old fool to go and sacrifice him somewhere. She knows what's right. If we follow the logic of the Midrash, the Akedah is Satan's idea. God is being duped by Satan. Sarah is aligned with God, which we, by the way, see with Sarah would understand, as opposed to Abraham, who's like dazed in a moral haze, like, you know, in L'Étranger, he's like dazed by all this. Sarah would have seen and would have said, this cannot be the God that spoke to you. Somebody is playing a trick on you. Somebody hacked the email. This does not sound like the divine plan. That does not make sense. Think about it, that if Sarah knew, and that's why Abraham escapes in the morning. According to the Midrash, Sarah is the one who really understands the nature of the divine. Abraham is the one who's dazzled by appearances. So it's fascinating. And I want to say something about the rabbis and women. There's a lot of talk about the rabbis not liking women. And there's definitely a misogynic element in the Talmud, while there's none of it in the Bible. There is a certain misogynic element in the Talmud. There is. I would be a liar if I said there isn't. But there's also a very pro-woman sentiment in the Talmud. And as a matter of fact, you will see that often the rabbis and the storytellers in Talmudic tales about women, they identify with the woman. The rabbinic sect, the rabbinic state of mind views itself as feminine. And this is something very interesting. It's also their idea that the nation of Israel is female, while God is male. It's a rabbinic idea. So the rabbis are using this moral tale to basically bring Sarah back into the story and says, hello, there's a mother to this child. And by the way, according to the Midrash, when Satan sees that he cannot force Abraham to stop his mission, he goes to Sarah. And you know what's, and this is, every time I say it, I become, you know, it's really a very emotional moment. Satan goes to Sarah and tells her no lies. He just tells her what happened. He just doesn't tell her the end, that the child is saved. He just goes and discloses to Sarah what her man did. And she drops dead. And that's why the death of Sarah comes right after the Akedah story. We never hear of the boy and the mother reunited. But think of the depth of the tragedy and how deep the understanding of the Midrash is about human nature. That all he needed to do is just tell her the horrific truth. He's not lying even. He just tells her what happened. He just doesn't tell her that the boy is saved. And that's enough to kill the mother. What my take from the Midrash is that we dare to question everything within our set of beliefs, and it's actually our duty to do so. And we have to keep, while remaining devoted and loyal and full of love and admiration to our canon, it is our job to keep hafoch ba vafoch ba. I'm going back to that Mishnaic dictum of like, you have to constantly, like you till the land, you have to constantly dig and turn it because more and more will come. If the story of the Akedah doesn't seem right to us, there are two strategies or a few strategies. One is to try to explain it to me, apologetics, which is 90% of what was done. Some is to say, okay, the whole thing is monstrous. I want nothing to do with it. That to me is a failure. And what the Midrash teaches us to do is to go and look deeper and try to understand how such a horrific thing came to be. Okay? And by introducing the idea that it was a diabolic scheme that kind of hijacked the divine, I find it to be fascinating. And it gives me a way to relate, also teaches me the skill of every time something doesn't seem like it works, I'm just gonna walk into it more. And I'm going to dig and dig some more, because some very surprising things will emerge. Not to give up on the text. I live in the modern world, you know. So I am too feeling the conflict. I too am trying to live with this duality between these my set of values and the very horrific set of values that this story represents. And it's amazing to me that it's not contemporary thinkers that help me, but it's actually ancient cultural ancestors of ours who gave me the tools to deal with this story.